welcome to the Podcast Digest, the podcast dedicated to helping you find the best shows worthy of your subscription, as well as conversations with their creators. And now, your host, Dan Lizette.
And welcome back to the Podcast Digest. I'm Dan Lizette, and I want to thank you once again for taking the time to listen this week. Although for most of the Podcast Digest, I focus on the listener angle of the podcasting relationship, I know many of you listening are also fellow podcasters, and I've actually received plenty of questions in the past from some of you, whether it be to review your show, of course, but some have even asked for help with some hardware issues, some software questions, and general podcasting information. I've done my best to help you guys where I can, but I'm really no expert. So today, I've asked an expert to join us. Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting and the Director of Podcasting for the upcoming New Media Expo next month in Vegas joins me this week. Dave Jackson, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Dan, I am pleased as punched and pickled and anything else that begins with a P to be here, man. This is great.
Well, I'm really happy that you agreed to join me here and to talk about a different angle of the podcasting sphere than I've had the chance yet to cover. I have recommended some other shows, some that I know you've listened to and talked about as well, but I decided to go right to the horse's mouth on this one to get to some of the listeners that I know I have some really great information that I know you have. But before we get to those, for folks unfamiliar with you or the School of Podcasting, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and what you do over there?
Sure. I've been podcasting since 2005, and in a nutshell, my background is in teaching. I've been teaching people technology for years, and I've been building websites going back to the days of Front Page and Dreamweaver. And when podcasting came along, it was a way to be A, creative, B, technical, like play with technology, and then C, scratch my teaching itch. So I started the School of Podcasting, which has basic step-by-step tutorials that'll walk you through planning your podcast, what gear to buy, how to use Audacity, how to use Audition, whatever software you want to use, how to use GarageBand, things like that, and then how to actually get it into iTunes, and then how to promote it. So I say really from one step all the way to the end to where you're in iTunes and you're growing your audience, we pretty much got you covered.
And I've been listening for a while and received a lot of great information. At least 6 or 7 months. I launched the show in September of last year, and it wasn't long after that I came across you and have been a regular subscriber and listener since. For folks who also may have been listeners or hopefully will be jumping on board right now, can you tell us a little bit about what your typical process is for assembling an episode, how you decide on the topic, what you use to record and edit, just kind of an overview?
Yeah, a lot of it comes in from questions that people, either phone calls. I do a lot of consulting. Some people like to do the School of Podcasting. Some people would rather do the one-on-one consulting. So a lot of it is just what I'm seeing in my inbox, what I'm getting from SpeakPipe and phone calls. And just I have a private Facebook group for the School of Podcasting. So a lot of interacting with my audience and just seeing the things that people are struggling with. Or there's a new piece of technology that comes out, or there's a new software, things like that. So I'll go out and play with those and kind of come back and go, hey, this is actually really good, or here's the things I'm a little nervous about, things like that. So a lot of it just comes from my audience. And then there are those days on Friday when I'm like going, I have nothing for Monday. That's the fun days. I always have a couple things that I have a list of if I have nothing else. I can always do here's what I'm using behind the scenes at the School of Podcasting. Luckily, I haven't had to play that card yet, but that's always there because people always want to know what theme I'm using and, software and things like that. But most of the time it just comes straight from my audience.
Let me ask you a question. Speaking of Monday, and for those listening, this hopefully you're listening on a Sunday, but we are recording on a Monday evening. And really what generated my reach out to you today, Dave, was I listened to your most recent episode, Let's Give Them Something to Talk About. And on there, I heard something that I hadn't heard from you before. Now, I know you have an extensive back catalog, so I've not heard everything you've done. But this news segment that you did today was excellent. Can you tell me a little bit about what putting that together was like?
Yeah, that was the one. It was hilarious because that show was actually, normally my show is about 45 minutes to an hour, and this one was a little closer to 40 minutes. But the actual part of what it is, it's a fake newscast. And I was reading a book. That's actually where this episode came from. I was reading a book about word of mouth, and I was just thinking about, standing out and what kind of content can get your audience talking about you, because they're going to talk about you one way or another. Either it's, well, that guy was really boring, or did you hear this? And I was just thinking about, people always say, well, why should we start another podcast about podcasting? And I always say, well, if you think about it, when you turn on the news at night, there's CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox, plus another bunch on the cable, and they're all talking about the same thing. And so why is that? Well, because some people like the blonde on ABC and somebody likes the really hunky guy on CBS or whoever. There's different styles and different approaches and things like that. But I thought about that. They all do really cover the same thing. So I thought about every single cliche. And my favorite was the sports guy. Because if you watch
Yes.
sports, they're all it's let's interview the coach. And it's, these guys are like brothers to me and they all pulled hard together. And then the weather guy, I thought about that. I'm like, why do we even have weathermen now? Because everything you want from a weatherman you can get from your phone. And when in doubt, I always default to my angry man voice. I don't consider myself a great voiceover, but I've always been weird. And, at a drop of a hat, I could just start talking like this for no apparent reason. And so there was that. And then just every single cliche you could think of. Why is every sports guy hopped up on something? It's like he drank 14 Red Bulls and now he's going to talk about sports. And the fact that every day a politician lies and somebody gets shot and, a restaurant closes. So just every single cliche. And I was kind of worried because that clocked in at 4 minutes. And I was like, you know what? I always talk about how I don't want to waste people's time. And it was just a matter of, is this entertaining? Because sometimes the worst thing I can do is try to be funny. I'm rather sarcastic. I don't take myself too seriously, but I was really trying to be entertaining, and I was really worried. And I played it for my wife, and she didn't even chuckle. That's because she's used to Dave. And but every time I played it, and especially heard the weather guy go, "It's on your phone," I giggled. I'm like, you know what? It's making me laugh. So I went ahead and put it in. And I've taken some risks like that. I always say it's the same content. And so the content is part of it, but it's also how do you deliver the content? I mean, in the past, and these are all me doing the voice. I interviewed an internet troll who everything I just said, he just said it stunk. And on show 400, I've often spoken about a fake morning radio team called Binky and the Wiz. And so on episode 400, I wanted to do something kind of special to celebrate 400. So I did this whole radio drama thing. This is when Serial had just kind of came out. And I had Binky and the Wiz. They came in, they kidnapped me. My wife came in and did a fake 911 call. And it ended up being, I don't know, maybe again 5-7 minutes long, but it took me the better part of a week because I had all these sounds of police and me getting beat up, and it sounds like a lot of fun. But that little 4-minute segment that I did in this last episode probably took me the better part of 45 minutes to put together. Partly because I'm a perfectionist, and partly number two, I was blowing out my voice about every 10 minutes.
Well, as a listener, I'm here to tell you it sounded great. There's some immediate feedback for you. I found it really entertaining. Let me ask you this, an unscripted question here. You mentioned how this is, somewhat something you've done before, but obviously different than, say, your regular entrant into the iTunes library with each episode. Do you find a level of satisfaction in trying this kind of different level of production, or is it just sort of to change it up?
A little bit of both. Yeah. I mean, the one thing I never want to do is be predictable, but I don't want to go so crazy that people are like, well, I tuned in to hear, podcasting tips, but he was singing and dancing and tap dancing, and that wasn't very helpful. So it's always a matter of how can I creatively make a point? So with the case of Binky and the Wiz, they're doing the weather. This was just the epitome of radio guys who don't get podcasting. So I'm always trying to make a point. I always say anytime you can use a story or anything to make a point as opposed to just stating the facts. And there are those people that like just the facts, and I try to get to the point. But for me, in a sea of, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 people now that do podcasts about podcasting, you got to do something to stand out. And I've always been... I would say I'm always a little weird. I try to, my day job is teaching people technology, I always try to classify myself as edutainment. So anything, if I can have people having fun while they're learning, then it doesn't feel so much like school.
I think it's a great approach, and I know I've definitely learned a lot from you over the 6 months or so that I've been a listener. I mentioned in the open, Dave, about equipment and software, and those are questions I have received in the past. And I know you've done tons of episode and content and on your website all over the place about your recommendations. So I want to ask you a question on that topic that maybe is a little bit different. There's all kinds of any amount of spending that one could do, be it equipment or software, up and down sort of the pricing scale. But in your mind, though, what would be some of the minimums that you would recommend to somebody that they don't skimp on? Are there particular areas that you think the spending's worth it? If somebody's just starting out and they only have X amount of dollars, where should they focus those dollars?
Yeah, it sounds weird. The number one thing you need, I've seen people spend hundreds of dollars on a microphone. There's a thing called a pop filter that I'm actually talking through right now. It's like a mesh kind of screen that goes in front. It goes between your mouth and the microphone, because if you put your hand right over your mouth and say something like peanut butter, you'll be amazed at how much air comes out when you say that. And so without one of those, you can have a really great microphone and you can make it sound absolutely horrible, and it'll be blowing out people's speakers and things like that every time you say peanut butter. So that would be one. And you can go to Guitar Center or whatever and get what I call a clown nose. It's basically a big piece of foam rubber to stick over it. Or you can go a little higher and you can, spend $15 to get kind of a clamp on one. That would be one. And then my favorite microphone, I'm talking into one right now, is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. It's a little bit like a stock in podcasting, because it's been as low as $40 and as high as $80. And I think right now they're going for about $60. And what I love about them versus the other USB microphones is, yes, I can plug it into a computer and go directly to the computer. That's great. But I can also plug it into a mixer in the event I ever have to go into a situation where there's more than one person in the room and we're going to be using a mixer. It doesn't turn into a paperweight like the Blue Snowball and the Blue Yeti. Not that they're bad microphones. There are other reasons why I don't like those microphones, but that's one of the things I love. It sounds great. It's somewhat affordable. And the fact that it's flexible enough to go USB, or if you need to, a mixer. So those would be the two to get you started.
Yeah, my Blue Yeti is currently a paperweight, so I can appreciate that as well. It was a great thing to start out with, but once I decided to go mixer and other people and so on and so forth, it became not necessarily as useful as it once was.
Yeah. It's cool looking, though.
Oh, yeah, and that's why I keep it as the paperweight function,
there you
because
go.
It looks great to look over to occasionally. All right, let me ask you this, Dave. You obviously in your career have seen all the ups and downs of podcasting, and I'm sure through your shows you've had the ups and downs yourself. What is the driving force that kind of keeps you plowing through it, especially if there's been a time when maybe the download numbers or the listener feedback and engagement haven't been what you'd like? I know somebody right now is listening to this who's in that situation. What would you tell them?
Well, in the day that if it's the fourth episode or fifth episode that you've done, and you go, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, and I don't know, and you're just like, you're kind of dreading, you remember the old commercial, time to make the donuts. If you're not going, it's time to make the podcast, maybe it's not. Maybe it's time to go, you know what would I rather talk about instead? And it sounds weird. So it's like, so you're saying stop? And I'm like, yeah, because typically if you're in that attitude of, all right, well, today we're going to talk about microphones, or we're going to talk about feed burner for the 14th time, I don't want to listen to that, because if you're not excited about it, then what the heck what do you think your audience is going to do? So, but I've been in those situations, and that's why I say give it maybe 2 months, because I've had a couple that, and number one, tell your audience not so much to hold them hostage, but just, ask them, say, hey, I'm struggling right now coming up with topics, and I really, really appreciate you listening. If you could, it'd be really helpful for you to, send me an email. Obviously, you got to have that contact page ready to go, and so people can call you or email you or whatever way you want it, and let me know what you'd like to hear on the show. And that sometimes can help, because I do a show called Weekly Web Tools that I've almost killed twice. Now, right now, I love that show, but there are times when the resources I use to to find new web tools dry up. And I'm like, oh, now what do I got to do? And now it takes, 4 times as much time to do that show. And I'm like, ugh. And I just went out to my audience and I said, anybody know any good resources for stuff like this? And what would you like to hear about? Or why don't you tell me your favorite tool? And they chimed right up. It's kind of weird because that audience does not interact with me a whole lot until I come out and say, hey guys, I'm struggling right here. What do you got? And then they come out and just overwhelm me, which is great. So, when in doubt, get your audience involved. That's always kind of step number one. And, if you ask that question and you get no response at all and you're still struggling, then announce, hey, I'm going to take a break for a couple months. I'll be back. And there's a running joke on the School of Podcasting. Nobody's going to punch you in the face if you take a break from your podcast. Now, on one hand, it is good to have a consistent schedule because then you become a part of people's routine. But if you're really struggling, just say, hey, I'm going to take a month off. I'll be back. Feel free to go back and do the back catalog, and I'll be back, and send me your email with any suggestions you have. And maybe you just need a quick vacation.
And then call it season 2 when it comes back.
That's right.
That seems to be the trick nowadays.
Yeah.
Speaking of the audience question, if you will, or one that I received personally about a week or two ago, and I really wasn't sure to say. It was actually a suggested topic for my show, and I realized that it's probably not something I can educatedly speak on, but I have a feeling you've got opinions on this one. What are your thoughts on podcasting networks? Pros, cons, there's some small ones, some big ones. I'm not a part of one, and I haven't seen the need as of yet, but what do you think?
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting thing because the pros in some cases are the network's able to go out because maybe you don't have the magic 5,000 downloads per episode, but your network can go out and say, we have this many shows, and they can be able to get a sponsor because when you combine all your shows, then you've got enough, if you're going to go the advertising model, which is in terms of ways to monetize your podcast, kind of meh, because it's hard and it's a radio model that we're trying to fit to podcasting. So that's a pro. You get cross promotion, right? So hopefully somebody on the network is saying, at the end of the show, I know my buddy Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast is part of the Tech Podcasts or Tech Network, right? It's so good that I can't remember their name, but at the end, it's like if it's tech, it's here. So that's kind of a thing where they're driving people to the website, and hopefully then people are finding your show. The cons, I'm not sure there's a con. It's got to be a con for the person that runs the network, because now anytime one of the pros is going to be exposure, somebody's going to say, well, how come they get more exposure? Why are they on the front page? So you've got to make it even, and you've got to, be sure to work as a team. And then how do you decide who's part of the network and who's not part of the network? It's an interesting thing. I know what's going to be interesting is you have things like now like Podcast One and Midroll and all these other ones that are kind of cropping up. And in the end, these are all using that whole radio kind of advertising model where you get paid per thousands of downloads. And the people that are getting thousands of downloads are the celebrities right now, right, as well as some people that aren't. But in the end, we're going to run out of celebrities. So eventually that's going to have to trickle down to, for lack of a better phrase, the rest of us who maybe aren't getting quite so much. And that's where, one of the big networks is Blueberry. They basically have advertising from time to time. And Todd Cochran is the guy behind that. And, you could have 300 downloads an episode and still get advertising. So they have its pros and cons. I'm not really – it's one of those things like it's like Gatorade. Some people like it, some people don't. There's no real, pro. I've seen people – I don't know that anybody has ever come out and said, well, if I wasn't part of this network, I never would have gotten there. I think they boost you. They're helpful, but I don't know that, if only I was on a network, then I could, be on the cover of Time Magazine. I don't know that there's that much of a push behind them, but it's like anything else. You get some relationships going with the other hosts there. That could be fun, things like that. So
let me ask you this as a potential con on that front. It's a thought I've had internally. Now, I've not been approached, nor have I approached any other networks, but it's a thought I had in the back of my mind. I wonder if anyone else is thinking this. What about potential loss of identity, right? Where you become sort of one of a stable of shows, if you will, and maybe you may not want to be associated with one of the shows that's also within the stable. Is there any value to that, or do you think it's just we're overthinking it?
No, that's actually a valid point, because I have had people. I consider myself a person of faith. I've gone to church my entire life. One of the people I've interviewed on the show, because he's insanely creative, insanely entertaining. Oh, and by the way, he's an atheist. His name is George Hrab. And I've had some people go, "Why are you interviewing George Hrab on your show? I mean, I thought you I thought you liked God." And I'm like, I do like God. I think God's awesome. I also think George is awesome. And the last time I heard, Jesus hung out with sinners. And if I ban this guy, and plus there's a lot we can learn from this guy. And I'm a guy that let's collaborate on what we agree with. And, we'll agree to disagree on the other stuff. So there are times when people go, depending on who you're associated with. And if you've got thin skin, podcasting is not for you.
Right.
I did a thing a couple weeks ago where I was talking about Elsie Escobar, who does a show called The Feed. She does a podcast called She Podcasts. It's basically made for women. And I said, I love Elsie, which I do. She's awesome. She's incredibly positive. And I just said, she's like the Betty Rubble of podcasting. And somebody got offended because one of her, now on one hand, it's really cool, but one of her, this was, for some people, that's our queen. That's our woman leader of podcasting. She's our champion. And when you say she giggles, well, that's little girls giggle and Betty Rubble. And it was kind of like, hey, what did you mean by that? Now, what was really cool is I was able to have a conversation via email and go, well, hold on, let me understand your point of view. Where are you coming from? And that's when I was like, oh, this is awesome. You're defending your queen. This is another great thing about podcasting. Your audience will come and defend you. And I'm like, no, I didn't mean it that way anyway. And we had a really cool, really long email blast back and forth, about 3 or 4, till we finally understood where we were coming from. And, but I kind of told her, I said, well, I'll try to keep that in mind in the future. But in reality, that's just me being me. And hopefully now you understand I'm one of the good guys and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. So yeah, you'll have stuff like that. And, if somebody, that is one of the things you'd want to, before joining a network, what happens if when you join the network, you had 6 shows, how do we bring new people on? Do you get to vote? Well, what if you get outvoted? The other 4 people said, yeah, let's bring this guy on. And now it's, Debbie's Porn Hut. And you're like, oh, I don't want to be associated with this.
Right. So,
and then it's a matter of how do I leave and who controls my feed and all that other fun-filled stuff. That would be something you definitely want to think about. That's a good point.
Elsie is excellent over there at Libsyn. I've been telling her for months now I owe her a promo, and I need to put that together for her for the feed, but I have not yet done that. So, yeah. Elsie, if you hear this, I'm sorry, and it's coming. Speaking of things surrounding podcasts and their importance, how do you feel about a podcast website? How important, what level of importance would you put that? Because I've heard yourself, Paul Colligan, Real Brian, all kinds of folks kind of land in all different places on this topic. What are your thoughts?
Depends on what you're doing. If you are looking to just get the word out, I mean, on one hand, if you don't have a website, how do you share it with people? Then you have to share the podcast. Like you have to tell your audience, hey, subscribe here in iTunes or in Stitcher or whatever it is. There's no place to send people, right? So how do you say, yes, go see it. It's right here. It's kind of hard to link to nothing. So to me, that's why you need a website. You also, if you are going to try to monetize it all, and by all means, you do not need to monetize your podcast, but if you're saying, hey, go out to whatever your website is.com and click on the Amazon banner. Well, if you don't have a website, kind of hard to click on the Amazon banner. And if you want people to sign up, things like that, it's just a great way to connect with people. So on the other hand, you can use your media host as your website. Not something I would recommend, but I'm starting to really feel that there are a lot of different recipes for podcasting. And there are definite best practices, but it really does depend on what you're doing. I'm doing an experiment right now where I'm trying to podcast for free, and I'm doing all sorts of things that I normally wouldn't do. But on the other hand, if you have somebody who, a teacher that wants to do a podcast with a bunch of kids and they don't care about their website, they just want to get in iTunes and record some stuff. Well, here's a solution for that. That's completely different than the person that wants to start a podcast for their business and get a better connection with their audience. That's 2 separate things. You're not going to have a one-size-fits-all in that situation.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've always wondered as well, because I have seen podcasts out there that clearly have put so much time and effort into their website, and it looks great. And then there are others that, don't. And I would probably put my own in the conversation that doesn't. If I could go back, I would probably land somewhere else than where I am. But in a conversation I had with another podcaster once, I think that the determination we came to on this subject was it's simply another vehicle where you could demonstrate your particular skill set or your voice. So he uses it as a combination between blog and show entries. I've tried to do a little bit about that, but he's a lot better. He does a lot of movie pop culture type stuff. So you'll see written entries interspersed with his podcast releases, and so he kind of keeps the conversation going with comments on those, and it sort of self-propels into the next week's episode. So that was one of the things we saw that was working really great as well.
Well, because Google doesn't understand audio, but if you have a blog post, now it's there. And again, going back to depending on your show, if you have a lot of points, if you're saying here's the 7 steps to, whatever it is, okay, people can listen to that. And that's fine, but if they want to go back and study it again, it's nice if you have it in a written form and here are the 7 steps, and they can copy and paste it and send it to a friend via email and things like that. Where no website, now it's in the RSS feed, it's on their phone, and now they've got to try to copy and paste from the phone, and it's a little harder to share. So there are pros and cons to each.
Absolutely. Now I want to talk about something, Dave, that I have borrowed a time or two. And first part is me coming clean with you that I've borrowed this because I have actually integrated this into a couple of the interviews I've done with other podcasters, because I constantly think about this, and it hits me so often when these instances come up. But you have a segment or a feature, if you will, that you come up with occasionally where you're asking other podcasters the "because of my podcast" question, and you're looking for an experience or something that they have experienced that they feel they may not have otherwise. Mm-hmm. So now I would like to pose the question to you. What's your favorite story because of your podcast?
Probably the last one was when I got hired to be the director of podcasting for the New Media Expo. And it was something that I wish I'd planned it this well, but it really just happened that Rick Calvert, who's the main guy but behind the New Media Expo, he went to Rob Walsh, who's the vice president of podcaster relations at Libsyn. He went to Todd Cochran, who's the main man behind the Blueberry Network, and he went to Rob Greenlee, who at the time was working for Podcast One. He's worked for Microsoft, 3 pretty heavy hitters in the podcast sphere. And he said, we've got to replace the guy that left. You guys got any ideas? And they all went, what do you think about Dave Jackson? He's really passionate about podcasting. He's been doing it a long time. And I couldn't plan that any better. And the only way that those guys knew about me was through my podcast. And then, of course, I meet them at different events and things of that nature. But that's one where I don't believe I would have gotten that position without my podcast. In the past, I've gotten a job. I got a teaching job once because I knew how to podcast. I've met a ton of great people. I mean, I just went to Toledo last week, and I announced it in my Facebook group. Hey, I'm going to be bored tomorrow night in Toledo. And somebody said, hey, I live in Toledo. You want to meet for lunch? So things like that just, so many people talk about people that make, thousands of dollars a month and hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. But, to me, it's hard to put a price on lunch with Nick Suberling because that was really, really cool. So there are lots of ways that you can benefit from podcasting outside of money. Not that money is bad. Money is a great thing, but there are other ways. So, yeah, that's probably some of the top ones that have come up lately.
Those are great experiences, and I've had smaller instances in my brief 30-episode career as well, but I think about that segment all the time, and I think it's a great one. But
you got to record that and send it in.
I'll put you on the list with Elsie at this point.
Elsie, exactly.
But I want to go back, Dave, because you mentioned something that I want to talk more about, to understand more about, so the podcasters listening will know more about it as well. That's New Media Expo. That's next month, as I mentioned in the open in Vegas. For somebody who's hearing that term for the first time, can you tell them a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's an expo that's been going on. Really, I went to my first one in 2005. It's had many names over the years. It was Blog World for a while. And what it is podcasting, it's video, and it's bloggers. And we all get together because in the end, we're all content creators. And there's some things that are specific for podcasting. There's some things that are, I don't want to learn about cameras in the podcasting track unless I'm doing video. And there's a lot of WordPress stuff in the blogging sector. And the sessions are awesome. I mean, we basically pick the best speakers delivering the best content. And it's not so much people that know it, because that's great, but we also need people that can, if you can explain it in a way that my mom can understand, you're the person I want at New Media Expo. And so the sessions are awesome. And I hate to say this because I'm the guy that put the sessions together for podcasting. A lot of times the real gold, though, is in the hallway. It's the people, it's the networking that you do in the evenings, and you find like-minded people, and oh my gosh, you do a podcast just like mine. I've never heard of you. This is great. I mean, I picked up a co-host at an event. So that's really the fun part. And just the fact that sometimes we feel like we're all alone in the podcasting space. You ask your friends and they're like, what's a podcast? Or your family's like, what? You're going down to the basement again? And all of a sudden you have all these people who are just like you. They're all passionate. They want to reach the world. They want to impact their audience. And the fact that it's everybody's kind of on that same page. Last year, and this is an example, Ben Adam Smith. I would never know Ben Adam Smith. He's from the UK, and he actually flew over from England to come, and the whole time I saw him, I don't think he went to bed ever. He was like, "This is amazing! It's awesome! I can't believe I just talked to so and so. It was great." And he was just so pumped up through the whole thing. And so it really is. It's one of those things. It's hard to explain. You just have to kind of come and don't be shy. When you're standing in line at lunch, look at the next person and go, "So what brings you to the expo?" And they'll go, "Oh, I'm a video person, or I'm a podcaster." "Oh, well, tell me about your thing." And a lot of times what's fun, and I've done this a couple of times, is I'll meet somebody who's into cooking, and then I'll meet somebody who's into fishing. And I'll happen to be at a table, and I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute, this guy can tell you how to cook your fish." And you start networking with people and connecting the right people together. It's a blast. It's for me. I mean, I've gone every year since 2005. I skipped 1 year because I had some family issues I had to take care of. But it's like summer camp. You go back and you see the same old people, and you catch up. And hey, what have you been up to? And so it's a great time.
Now, by the time folks are hearing this, they may be a little too close to spend the time in Vegas, but maybe not. But either way, I see on the website here, there's a virtual ticket as well, where they can get the sessions and the PowerPoints as well, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. That's always good stuff.
Obviously going to miss the stuff in the evening, but they'll get some of the good stuff.
That's right. Okay,
Dave, I heard a little more sensitive subject here, if you will. I had some feedback once, as I mentioned that, sometimes I get questions and I do my best to answer, and that's why we're here today. But somebody else I saw kind of come across my Twitter stream once or twice talked about the podcasts on podcasts. Now, I'm a fan at this point, and I can tell you for a fact my show has benefited from listening to you and Paul and Brian and John Lee Dumas and all these folks. But others think that, why would I need to listen to that, or why would I need to look into the School of Podcasting, or why would I need to go to New Media Expo, or whatever the case may be, when everything I need to know is on Google or YouTube? I want you to kind of shoot some holes in this theory for me.
Sure. Case in point, what do you say in a score? What is it? Evidence number one or whatever?
Yes,
I would
Exhibit A.
Yes, I would like to point to Dan's Blue Yeti sitting behind him, right? I could point to the Audio Technica 2020 sitting behind me. I can point to people that every week go, "I'm on Blog Talk Radio and I'm trying to leave. How do I leave?" Or "I'm on FeedBurner and it quit use. How do I update FeedBurner? It's ruined my feed." Or, and I always say you can pay in two currencies. You can pay with time, or you can pay with money. And if you're 15 and all you got is time, by all means, have fun on Google. And I'll see you in 7 months when you go, "Well, I used this feature and I did this and it's not." I'm like, okay, well, you found outdated stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that everything on Google and YouTube is bad. Absolutely not. There's a lot of really great stuff on YouTube. It's a matter of what if you don't know what you don't know? And then you set up a site with FeedBurner using Podomatic and Blog Talk Radio and all these other services that sure look like they're a good choice, but in the end, when you don't have that experience, I always say I try to get people on the road to pain-free podcasting because I help people surgically remove themselves from bad technology on a weekly basis. So, you're going to pay in time or you're going to pay in money, and I can get you on the road to the right microphone, because there are those people that will try to sell you $1,000 worth of equipment when you need about $99. They make money on that. God bless them. If you can get it, you do it. But I would rather, listen to what you want and then make sure you get what you need. Because sometimes what you want, you don't know that, what do you mean? I don't need to buy a mixer? No, if you're actually just recording yourself alone, you don't need a mixer. Oh, well, this says I need to buy this microphone and this mixer and this compressor. And yeah, if you're just starting out, let's just start off with the microphone and go from there, because you don't need that. So that would be hopefully I shot a couple holes in there, because, it's like I said, if you don't know what you don't know, it's like I said, you've got the microphone behind you to prove it. Yep. So do I. Mm-hmm. I've got the the wrinkles, the slightly lighter hair that I used to, from I always say I've made a lot of the mistakes for you. Right. This year I almost got sued because there was a service that came out called Audello that just had some things that I vehemently disapproved of.
I remember these. I remember these episodes.
Yeah, and I came out and was really just, hey, freedom of speech, buddy. And I found out when they said, we're getting really close to releasing the hounds on you. Could you change this and this? And I did some research and found out that, you have to make sure to say, in my experience, and, there are certain ways you have to kind of frame things. That I can then say, okay, if you're going to be doing reviews, here's some things you need to disclose. Here are ways that you can say things negative without getting sued, so things like that. And in the past, if we go back to like 2006, I remember I found a forum. This is back before the days of Facebook groups and stuff. But I found this forum, and it was like the ultimate forum of my audience. I'm like, this is awesome. And my very first post was, hi, I'm Dave Jackson. I do this podcast about blah, blah, blah. Here it is. Come listen to my show, and links aplenty. And everybody went, well, thanks for the spam, Mr. Whoever you are. Right. Blocked. And that was my one and only post on what looked to be my best audience forum ever. And I went, oh, yeah, you guys might want to make friends with people before you go mentioning your podcast. So,
yeah, and you talked about saving time and money. I actually would add a third one to that, Dave, and that's frustration. Anybody who's been doing this for any amount of time, and folks, a lot of you listening do and are, or maybe you're considering it, I think there's inherent frustration that occurs, whether you're doing the right things or not. I remember, and this is probably the famous age-old story. If I've learned this thing 30 episode in, I know you know this, and several others do. The infamous random reset of my Skype settings that started to record a whole episode from the internal microphone on my MacBook Air.
Nice.
And it was horrible. It made what should have been an hour editing job into a 4-hour re-recording my side of the conversation as the conversation happened job. And it's little things like that, and kind of a pre-launch checklist, if you will, that now I go through so that doesn't happen anymore. And that type of frustration are the things that obviously a personal consultant, personal coaching could help to ensure that you don't have to go through.
Yeah, another fun one is I have people that will say, well, I'm going to launch on this day. And I'm like, okay, well, where you at? Do you have your album art? No. Do you have the name of your show yet? Well, I'm kicking this around. Do you have a website yet? Well, almost. And they want to launch in like 9 days. And I'm like, whoa, you have the cart so far in front of the horse. And I've seen deadlines. They're great. I love them because they do create kind of a sense of urgency and you kind of get focused. But I've also seen people make really huge mistakes just so they can hit a deadline. And I'm like, wait a minute. So podcasting's been around for 10 years. And now they can't wait another month for you to get your act together. I'm like, come on now. So
it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Dave, I heard you mention on a recent episode, actually, I think you mentioned it on today's episode, but I've heard you talk about it before, that you also have a day job and podcasting is primarily an evening weekend activity. That's exactly the same as it is for me. How would you say your efforts at kind of that work-family podcast balance have gone? And do you have any suggestions for somebody else if they're struggling to find that balance?
Yeah, at one point, it almost cost me my family. I love podcasting. To me, it is the ultimate mix of teaching, technology, and creativity. That's I don't golf, I don't fish, but I'm a musician, so I'm kind of creative. And about the 47th time I went into my like little separate office area, and I would tell my wife, I'm going to go check my email. I'll be right back in like 15 minutes. And she was really cool with it. And I'd come out an hour and a half later. And, about like I said, about the 47th time, she's kind of like, we need to have a chat, because I just could not separate. I just was, even when I was home, I wasn't home. And so we talked about it. We tried a couple of different things. And then the one day she did some research and said, just like a one-room office somewhere that's not here might be the key, because then when you're here, you can be here. You won't be thinking about the email and things like that. And so I got a little office above a deli, was the first one I had. And we kind of sat down, and she said, look, I know you love this podcasting thing. I don't expect you to give up podcasting. I don't want you to give up podcasting. You're good at it. And I said, okay, how much time would you consider enough time for family time? And she said, well, give me at least 4 days out of the 7 days a week. How's that? And I'm like, wow, okay, that's cool. And so what we do is on Monday nights and Thursday nights, that's basically what we call the Dave Cave. That's what she calls my office now. And then most of Saturday up till about 3 o'clock. And then Sundays, it's kind of, I get up, I go to church on Saturday night. So that gives me Sunday morning. And then kind of Sunday morning till whenever she wakes up. And when she's had her coffee and is kind of ready to do something on Sunday. So between those times is when I'm then focused. And at first I really freaked out, because I used to just podcast 24/7. And I'm like, man, this is going to be hard to, do all that. But I use a tool called Asana, ASANA.com, and I use Evernote. And so when I get here, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And it's, okay, I'm going to, mix down this audio for this client. I'm going to fix this website thing. Then I'm going to record, weekly web tools. I'm going to record the one segment of the School of Podcasting, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm done. And so I'm super hyper-focused. I stay away from things like Netflix and YouTube that will just suck you in. And when I'm here, I'm, full steam ahead, and that has really helped. And what's really cool is when you can do that and stick to it, then you will find that your spouse, your kids and family, when they're happy because they are getting the time with you, it's much easier to then color outside the lines and goes, ooh, honey, I just got hired for the New Media Expo. How about we go every other Tuesday as New Media Expo night? And she's like, that's fine.
Right.
So yeah, but it took a little bit of time and a lot of work to get it straight. And I was surprised at how focused I am when I'm here.
That's great. I mean, that physical segmentation seems to be really, really helping for sure.
And I've heard of other people that just have a dedicated time. They're like, hey, Wednesday night is when Daddy goes into his room, and that's when he's podcasting. So come in and don't mess with him, and they'll hang the tie on the doorknob or whatever it is to signal that. And just by having a set time and day, that way there's no surprise that, oh, you're podcasting tonight? No, of course I am. It's Thursday.
Right.
Just seems to eliminate a lot of the headache.
So big, broad question for you, Dave. Everyone has been hearing about, and I'm sure you're extraordinarily sick of it at this point, this whole podcast going through a resurgent thing. I'm sure you're not buying it. I'm not buying it. I think maybe it's getting a little more attention, but, listen to Rob and those folks over at Libsyn. They'll tell you steady growth for years and years and years. But my question for you is, where do you think the podcasting medium is going? Where do you think, big, broad range, a few years down the road? And you mentioned that there's going to be more and more celebrities getting into it. Anything like that you foresee coming down the road?
Yeah, if we kind of compare podcasting to blogging, 10 years ago, I'm not sure when blogging first came on the scene, but originally it was just people doing little diaries and things like that. And now you have things like the Huffington Post, which is basically a big blog, right? From what I understand, that, is now cited like an actual like media source, So I see podcasting going that way, where we all kind of started off with, these crazy, I think Steve Jobs called it amateur hour, and now we have more and more people coming in, and with NPR coming on board, I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I know a lot of people are really excited about Apple CarPlay and Stitcher CarPlay or whatever they're calling it, where it's going to be in dashboards. Yay. I'm not against that, but I also know that when I buy a car, I keep it until the tires fall off. So by the time I buy a car that has that in it, and plus most of them are like, oh, they're in Mercedes and Rolls Royce. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. When it gets to a Honda, I'll think about it. So it's going to be a long time till I have that in my car. And I kind of at this point go, and plus I don't need it because I already have my phone connects to I have a Toyota Prius. It connects via Bluetooth. So I'm already listening to podcasts in the car. So I don't know that that's going to be quite the huge push that everybody thinks it is. But in terms of resurgence, what resurged was the fact that a radio program, in this case, This American Life, launched Serial, who had a bunch of friends in media who then covered it. Now, for the record, Serial was a phenomenal podcast. That was one that I was just, the minute it was out, I was listening to it. But really what was a resurgence was the resurgence of covering podcasts in the media. Right. And the numbers have been going up and up and up. And I'm sure, I think probably by the end of the year, maybe not, we'll see. But we're due for another Podcasting is Dead. Because what happens is you'll get a whole big people jumping on board, and then they'll, it's been 6 months. I'm not making $5,000 a month. This doesn't work. It stinks. I'm done. And so then you'll have somebody say podcasting is dead. And some people just do that. They call it link bait, right? You put up that post so that all the podcasters can get offended and come over and go, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. But it gets a lot of people, get a lot of eyeballs on your blog by simply saying podcasting is dead. And I expect that to happen sometime in the next probably 3 to 6 months, because we haven't had a good old-fashioned podcasting is dead in a while. But yeah, I just see it going up and up and up. And as more and more things, right now the other kind of thing that really helped is the whole the fact that it's on your smartphone. You don't have to synchronize anything anymore. You can download a podcast from anywhere. You don't have to plug it in. And now it's going into things like Sonos, which is this wireless speaker system that you can have in your house. It's just more and more people are going to have that little podcast button on the front of their interface. And the easier it is to consume them, the more and more people are going to go, what is this podcast thing? And so it's kind of fun. I have a stepson who's not really, he's more into listening to streaming music and things like that. But he's part of the high school fencing squad. And I just, as a joke, I'm like, hey, let's hold on a second. I was driving him to his fencing thing, and I go, let's see if we can pick up any tips. And sure enough, there were a couple podcasts about fencing, and he's like, really? So I think a lot of people, are going to kind of go, well, they're going to have somebody to show them, hey, here, did you know this was here? And the fact that you don't have to listen to 37, car advertisements and AC/DC's "You Shook Me All Night Long" again, or
right
for the 4,000th time. So I think it's just going to go up and up and up and up and up.
And I'll join you on your speculation on the future, especially when you were talking about, Apple CarPlay or Stitcher's implementation in the car. What's interesting, and I'm a huge tech fan. That's kind of how I broke into this. I've interviewed a lot of technology-centric folks and recommended a lot of technology shows. Rumors are breaking this week, speaking of Apple, kind of the huge, the iTunes being the primary library for a lot of podcasts. Apple's coming out with what is rumored to be a new Apple TV this summer, or at least announce it, and possibly have an over-the-top cable subscription for $30 to $40 a month. And they're trying to basically redo your living room experience. You mentioned Sonos. If Apple TV, the new one, has any type of implementation for podcasts, even if it's just a selection on the menu, they're talking about more storage in this device, so on and so forth. If podcasts could get a seat at the table right there with a new over-the-top cable TV service from Apple, that would be huge. And I think that could be another thing. Getting it into the living rooms and through the existing Bluetooth and home theater systems could be a big deal as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a couple years ago, I guess it's been a couple years at this point, iHeartRadio kind of opened up their doors to have podcasting get on that platform. And there's always rumors about Pandora and Spotify possibly having podcasting in the future. I haven't really seen anything. There was a screenshot somebody had of Spotify. Yeah. But it's like, okay, was that photoshopped or, it's been very, very quiet on that front. So you always hear rumors, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see as we slowly start to take over your living room and your car.
One last question for you, Dave. As a podcast listener, as you mentioned you are with Serial, and I'm sure some others, one of the things I've been doing for a while now with the Podcast Digest is, of course, recommending podcasts. So I want to ask you, maybe for a couple of each, your podcast-centric and your non-podcast-centric favorites right now in your playlist.
Okay, non-podcast-centric. I just found this one, and I'm proving that when you find something you like, you will binge listen. Eddie Trunk is a guy from radio. He's on Sirius Satellite Radio. I grew up in the 80s, the late 80s, and he's got all these bands, all these hair metal bands and hard rock. I'm a big hard rock guy. And he's got great stories from these guys. So it's not just because he can't play their music on a podcast. So I'm hearing all sorts of stuff about that. And then another one that I still don't know quite why I'm listening to this, besides it's just interesting insights into kind of the tenacity that people have in the entertainment business. And it's called Industry Standard with Barry Katz, who is, he's been a manager for pretty much every single comedian that, Dave Chappelle, Jay Moore, I forget the guy with the weird hand gesture. Oh, but I mean,
Jeff Dunham with the puppets.
No, he's younger. He was in movies for a while. It's going to drive me crazy.
Oh, Josh Blue.
No.
No?
No. He's very physical, but anyway.
Oh, I'm not good at this game.
Yeah. But he's interviewing all these people like heads of movie studios and heads of television networks and explaining kind of like how they got there. And it's interesting finding how networking and relationships comes into play over and over and over, and just the creative ways that people have found to, get the attention of people. So I discovered that just because he was on Jay Moore's podcast, and I heard he was starting his own, and came over and listened. And I've never heard of half of his guests, but they always have these interesting stories. So it's called Industry Standard with Barry Katz.
And in the podcasting space, do you have others that you listen to?
Sure. I listen to Ray Ortega's Podcaster Studio. I listen to Daniel J. Lewis, The Audacity to Podcast. You already mentioned Brian from the real Brian, from Profit Cast. I listen to them all pretty much in a nutshell. I listen to Cliff. I listen to Podcast Junkies. I'm looking at my phone now. Podcast Dojo. And some of these are actual, in some cases, they are, I guess you would call them graduates of the School of Podcasting. So they've gone on to start their own podcast about podcasting. She Podcast is the one with Elsie, The Feed, so I listen to pretty much them all. And in many cases, I'll listen to the first 10 minutes. And if it's something that I kind of know, unless they're going to bring something new to the table, I'll kind of listen and go, yeah, okay, I know what they're going to talk about here. But on occasion, you will get that nugget that I'm like, ooh, I was unaware of that. So, in fact, this last show I just did that you mentioned, I actually played a clip from ProfitCast because it really just blew me out of the water. So
yeah, that was this conversation. You can only do 2 of these 3 things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's good stuff. So, yeah. And so I don't listen to radio anymore. I don't watch TV. And it kind of drives my wife nuts because there are times when I'm, doing the dishes with earbuds on and she's trying to talk to me. I can't hear her because I have my back to her and, I have my earbuds in.
I'm the same way. They are in probably 8 to 10 hours a day. My show subscription list is famously over 90 right now. So I can greatly appreciate listening all the time. That's for sure.
It's amazing when you actually hear, today I was listening to She Podcast and it was on 1X and I never listened to anything at 1X. And I was like, what is wrong with their theme music? I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Hold on. So I had to bump it back up to 2X because I listen to just about everything on 2X. You get used to it after
It's an acquired taste, I'm sure.
That's it. Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, speaking of acquired taste, Dave, you mentioned a lot of those shows on podcasts, and similar to what you mentioned before, the different news channels and this, that, and the other, you find the one that you like. And I can tell you when it comes to podcasts on podcasts, I've been listening to yours for a long time. You've helped me out with a lot of great information, probably never even known it. But I really appreciate you taking the time to join me here today. Before we go, though, of course, please tell everyone who hasn't heard the School of Podcasting or any of your other shows or efforts with New Media Expo, etc., how they can find you and learn more.
Yeah, my main website is schoolofpodcasting.com. I do have a number of shows about podcasting. Speaking of podcasting networks, this was birthed 2 days ago. If you go to powerofpodcasting.com, all my shows about podcasting are there, including Podcasting for Free, Podcast Review Show, Ask the Podcast Coach. They're all there at powerofpodcasting.com.
Perfect. And that link will be in the show notes as well, folks. Dave, once again, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a pleasure.
Dan, thank you very much.
Folks, that'll do it for this week here at the Podcast Digest. I hope you enjoyed. Come back again next week. My name's Dan Lizette, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.